Today's story follows Marcus Thompson, a bright but restless teenager from Riverside, a working-class neighborhood in Cleveland, who found himself trapped in a system designed to keep him small. Surrounded by guidance counselors who preached realistic expectations, family members who warned against getting ideas above your station, and teachers who rewarded conformity over creativity, Marcus was being systematically programmed to accept limitation as his permanent address. But deep inside, something rebelled against the invisible walls that everyone insisted were immovable. What Marcus discovered about the difference between those who break free from their circumstances and those who accept them would not only transform his own life, but challenge everything he'd been taught about intelligence, success, and what was truly possible for someone from his background. But before we begin this story, I ask that you help me by subscribing to the channel, like the video, and tell me what city you're watching from. This will help me reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Marcus Thompson sat in the back row of Jefferson High School's guidance office, staring at the motivational poster that read, "Dream big, work hard," while Mrs. Henderson shuffled through his academic file. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same institution that preached dreams was about to crush his. "Marcus, let's be realistic about your options," she began, her voice carrying the practiced tone of someone who had delivered this speech 1,000 times. "Your grades are average, your test scores are decent, but not exceptional. Community college, maybe a trade program. Those are solid, practical choices for someone from your background." Marcus lived in Riverside, a working-class neighborhood in Cleveland where ambition was often viewed with suspicion. His mother, Sandra, worked double shifts at the hospital cafeteria, always exhausted, always grateful for steady work. His father had left when Marcus was 12, but not before drilling into him the importance of knowing your place and not getting ideas above your station. "College is for rich kids, Marcus," his uncle Jerome would say during family barbecues. "You're better off learning a trade. Electricians make good money, and there's always work. Don't chase fairy tales." The neighborhood reinforced these messages daily. Marcus watched his older brother Kevin, once the smartest kid on the block, settle into a warehouse job after high school. "It's honest work," Kevin would say, but Marcus noticed how his brother's eyes had dimmed, how he'd stopped talking about the engineering books he used to devour. At school, the system was designed for compliance, not creativity. Teachers rewarded memorization over critical thinking, conformity over innovation. Marcus found himself constantly frustrated by the narrow pathways presented to him. Follow the rules. Don't question authority. Accept your predetermined role in society. You need to set realistic expectations, his English teacher, Mr. Davis, had told him after Marcus submitted a creative writing assignment that challenged conventional thinking. "Your job is to learn what we teach, not to reinvent the wheel." But Marcus felt something burning inside him, a restless energy that refused to accept limitations as permanent truths. During lunch breaks, he would sit in the library, not to study for tests, but to feed his hungry mind with books the curriculum ignored. He read about entrepreneurs who had built empires from nothing, scientists who had challenged established theories, artists who had created entirely new forms of expression. The contrast between what he was learning in his private reading and what the system was teaching him created a growing tension. The school counselors spoke of career paths, as if they were predetermined highways with no exits. The adults in his life talked about being practical, as if dreaming beyond your circumstances was a character flaw. "Marcus, you're a smart kid," Mrs. Henderson continued, "but you need to understand that not everyone is cut out for university. The statistics show that students from your demographic have a much higher success rate in vocational programs." As she spoke, Marcus felt the invisible walls closing in around him. The system wasn't malicious. It was something far more dangerous. It was a machine designed to sort people into predetermined categories, to convince them that their current circumstances were their permanent address. But deep down, Marcus sensed that something was wrong with this picture. If he was capable of understanding complex ideas when he read them on his own, why was he being told to limit his aspirations? If history was full of people who had broken free from their circumstances, why was he being counseled to accept his? That evening, walking home through streets lined with abandoned storefronts and boarded-up dreams, Marcus made a quiet decision. He would start questioning everything he'd been told about his place in the world. The rebellion began in the most unlikely place, the dusty biography section of Cleveland Public Library. Marcus had started spending his afternoons there, not because he was assigned to, but because he was hungry for stories the system didn't want to tell. Stories of people who had refused to accept their assigned place in the world. It was there he discovered Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, hidden between forgotten political memoirs. The book's opening lines hit him like lightning. Success comes to those who become success-conscious. Failure comes to those who indifferently allow themselves to become failure-conscious. Marcus read that sentence 3 times, feeling something click into place. The guidance counselors, his family, even his teachers, they weren't evil. They were failure-conscious. They had accepted limitations as unchangeable truths and were unconsciously passing that programming to him. "You're reading some heavy stuff," said Miss Chen, the librarian, noticing the stack of books Marcus had accumulated. Biographies of Steve Jobs, Richard Branson, Oprah Winfrey, people who had rewritten the rules of their industries. "I'm trying to understand something," Marcus replied. "Why do some people break free from their circumstances while others accept them as permanent?" Miss Chen smiled knowingly. Maybe because they stopped listening to other people's definitions of what was possible for them. That conversation planted a seed. Marcus began to notice how automatically he accepted other people's assessments of his capabilities. When Mr. Davis marked his creative writing as unrealistic, Marcus had always internalized that as truth. But what if it wasn't? What if unrealistic was just another word for thinking beyond current limitations? The real breakthrough came when Marcus stumbled across a YouTube video by a behavioral economist explaining something called System 1 and System 2 thinking. The speaker explained how most people live their entire lives on autopilot, accepting inherited beliefs without examination. System 2, deliberate conscious thinking, required effort, but it was where real change happened. Marcus realized he had been operating on System 1 his entire life, automatically accepting the narrative that his zip code determined his destiny, that his family's financial situation dictated his possibilities, that his school's low expectations were accurate assessments rather than institutional limitations. He started a notebook, not for school assignments, but for tracking his own thinking patterns. Every time he caught himself accepting a limitation without question, he wrote it down. "I can't afford college" became, "I haven't yet figured out how to afford college." "People like me don't start businesses" became, "I haven't yet learned how people like me start businesses." The change in language was subtle but powerful. Instead of permanent statements, he was creating temporary challenges that invited solutions. At school, Marcus began conducting small experiments. Instead of sitting in the back row, he moved to the front. Instead of staying silent during class discussions, he asked questions that pushed beyond the curriculum. When Mrs. Henderson called him in for another realistic expectations conversation, Marcus came prepared. "I've been reading about scholarship programs and alternative pathways to higher education," he told her, pulling out a folder of research he'd compiled. "I want to explore options you might not have considered." Mrs. Henderson looked genuinely surprised. Students from Riverside didn't usually come to guidance meetings with research folders. "Marcus, these programs are extremely competitive. The odds of someone from your background—" "With respect, Mrs. Henderson," Marcus interrupted gently, I'm more interested in the strategies of the people who beat those odds than in the statistics of the people who don't try. That evening, Marcus faced his first real test. At dinner, he mentioned his college research to his family. The reaction was immediate and predictable. "Boy, you're setting yourself up for disappointment," Uncle Jerome said, shaking his head. "You think you're better than the rest of us?" "It's not about being better," Marcus replied calmly. "It's about being different. And difference isn't a judgment, it's a choice." His mother looked worried. "Marcus, I just don't want to see you get hurt. Maybe you should listen to the counselor. She knows what she's talking about." For the first time, Marcus understood that the people who loved him most might also be the ones most invested in keeping him small, not out of malice, but out of their own fear and conditioning. "Mom," he said softly, "what if the biggest risk isn't trying and failing, but never trying at all?" 6 months after his awakening, Marcus had learned to play the game by his own rules. While his classmates competed for the approval of teachers who had already decided their fates, Marcus was building something entirely different, a parallel education system designed by him, for him. His bedroom had transformed into what he called his real classroom. One wall displayed a hand-drawn flowchart mapping unconventional paths to success. Scholarship deadlines, entrepreneurship competitions, online certification programs, and startup accelerators. Another wall featured quotes from the books that had rewired his thinking. "The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing." Walt Disney. The breakthrough came when Marcus discovered something the system had never taught him. He could create value before asking for anything in return. Instead of waiting for permission to prove himself, he started a tutoring service for struggling students in his neighborhood. Not because he needed the money, though the $15 per hour helped, but because he was testing a hypothesis. "If I can help other people solve problems," he wrote in his journal, "I'm developing skills that have real market value, regardless of what any guidance counselor thinks about my demographic statistics." The tutoring service revealed something profound. Marcus was naturally good at breaking down complex concepts and helping others see possibilities they couldn't see themselves. Within 2 months, he had 12 regular clients and a waiting list. More importantly, he had discovered that intelligence wasn't fixed. It was expandable through the right methods and mindset. His success attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Dr. Williams, a professor at Case Western Reserve University who lived in Marcus's neighborhood, heard about the tutoring service from his neighbor, whose daughter was one of Marcus's students. "Sarah's grades have improved dramatically," Dr. Williams told Marcus during a chance encounter at the local grocery store. "But more than that, she says you've changed how she thinks about learning itself. That's remarkable for someone your age." "I just help them realize they're capable of more than they think," Marcus replied. Dr. Williams studied him carefully. "Where did you learn to think like that?" "Napoleon Hill, Carol Dweck, Daniel Kahneman," Marcus answered without hesitation. "I've been studying how successful people think differently from average people." That conversation led to an invitation that changed everything. Dr. Williams invited Marcus to audit one of his business psychology classes at the university. "You're already thinking at this level," he said. "You might as well see what formal education at its best can offer." Sitting in that university classroom for the first time, Marcus felt the walls of his invisible cell crumbling. He wasn't just the smart kid from Riverside anymore. He was a peer among college students, contributing insights that impressed even the professor. But the real transformation happened at home. Marcus's success had begun to shift the family dynamic. His mother noticed the confidence in his voice, the way he carried himself, the steady income from his tutoring business. "You know, Marcus," she said one evening, "maybe I was wrong to discourage your college ideas. You're different from what I expected." Even Uncle Jerome's tone had changed. "Boy's got something," he admitted grudgingly. "Built himself a little business while other kids are playing video games." The shift wasn't just external, it was internal. Marcus had proven to himself that the system's assessments were opinions. not facts. His grades improved not because he suddenly became smarter, but because he approached learning strategically rather than passively. More importantly, he had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that permission was something you gave yourself, not something you waited for others to grant. Every day, he was becoming living proof that circumstances were starting points, not destinations. The boy who had once sat silently in the back row, accepting limitations as truth, was gone. In his place stood someone who understood that the game had rules, but those rules could be bent, broken, or bypassed entirely by those bold enough to think for themselves. 2 years after his transformation began, Marcus Thompson stood before the graduating class of Jefferson High School, not as valedictorian, but as something far more powerful, living proof that the system's limitations were optional. He had received a full scholarship to Case Western Reserve University, but that wasn't the real victory. The real victory was in the dozen other students from Riverside who had started their own small businesses, applied for competitive programs, and begun questioning the narrow pathways they'd been assigned. Marcus had become what Napoleon Hill called a positive influence, someone whose success gave others permission to rewrite their own stories. Mrs. Henderson approached him after the graduation ceremony, her expression a mixture of amazement and humility. "Marcus, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about your potential. How did you know you could achieve all this, when everything suggested otherwise?" Marcus smiled, remembering the scared boy who had sat in her office 2 years ago. "Mrs. Henderson, I didn't know I could, but I decided to find out instead of accepting someone else's conclusion." His tutoring business had evolved into something larger, a mentorship program that connected ambitious students from underserved communities with successful professionals. Dr. Williams had become his business partner, helping Marcus scale the impact beyond what he could achieve alone. "You've discovered something that most people never learn," Dr. Williams told him, "that the difference between successful and unsuccessful people isn't talent or luck. It's the willingness to think independently and act on that thinking." The ripple effects extended far beyond academics. Marcus's younger cousin, Jamal, had started a lawn care business after watching Marcus prove that age and experience weren't prerequisites for entrepreneurship. His neighbor, Mrs. Martinez, had enrolled in nursing school at 52, inspired by Marcus's example that it was never too late to pursue deferred dreams. Even his family had transformed. His mother had started taking business classes at the community college, no longer content with just steady work. Uncle Jerome, once the voice of limitation, now bragged about his nephew to anyone who would listen. "You know what you taught me?" his mother said one evening as they walked through their neighborhood, "that the biggest prison is the one we build in our own minds." Marcus nodded, understanding now that his real education hadn't happened in classrooms, but in the moments when he chose growth over comfort, possibility over certainty, independent thinking over inherited limitations. As they passed the library where his transformation had begun, Marcus reflected on the journey. The system hadn't been his enemy. It had been his starting point. Every limitation it had tried to impose had become a challenge to overcome. Every realistic expectation had become an opportunity to exceed expectations. His phone buzzed with a message from a high school student in Detroit who had watched one of Marcus's YouTube videos about breaking free from systemic limitations. "Your story gave me permission to dream bigger, starting my own journey today." Marcus smiled, realizing that his greatest success wasn't his scholarship or business. It was becoming someone who showed others what was possible when you stopped asking for permission and started granting it to yourself. The boy who had once accepted other people's assessments of his worth was gone, replaced by a young man who understood the most liberating truth of all, that in a world of followers, the person who learns to think independently doesn't just succeed, they become the one who rewrites the rules for everyone else. Remember this eternal truth: No one can imprison your mind without your consent, and no one can liberate it without your decision. The moment you choose to think for yourself, rather than accept others thinking for you, you cease to be a victim of circumstances and become the architect of your destiny.